From Vermont PBS, this is Democracy Now!
There needs to be a continuing resolution effective this Friday. The president has done everything possible, worked extremely hard with Congress to ensure that we maintain the government open, keep the government open.
President Trump is hitting his 100th day in office without a legislative victory. Republicans called off their 11th-hour attempt to revive a bill to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. We'll go to Capitol Hill to speak with Vermont Congressman Peter Welch, Chief Deputy Whip of the House Democratic Caucus. Then thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of climate activists from around the country are converging on Washington, D.C. for the People's Climate March on Saturday. Trump has already begun dismantling President Obama's climate legacy and revived the Keystone XL and Dakota Access pipelines. He's also put climate change deniers in charge of several key agencies, including the Environmental Protection Agency, and threatened to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord. All this, as scientists have confirmed, 2016 was the hottest year on record. We'll speak with 350.org founder Bill McKibben.
Physics is our enemy, and it imposes a difficult time limit here. We don't have any more presidential terms to waste, so we're going to have to figure out as a nation, and maybe more importantly as a planet, how to work around Trump to one degree or another.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The state of Arkansas Thursday carried out its fourth execution in 8 days, injecting 38-year-old Kenneth Williams with a 3-drug cocktail that paralyzed him and stopped his heart. An Associated Press witness said Williams' body jerked 15 times in quick succession as he was administered the drugs before slowing for a final 5 movements. He was pronounced dead at 11:05 p.m. Arkansas time. A spokesperson for the Republican Governor Asa Hutchinson, who did not witness the execution, called Williams' movements an involuntary muscular reaction. An attorney for Williams called the claim a whitewash and called for an investigation. Arkansas rushed to carry out an unprecedented series of killings as its supply of the sedative midazolam was set to expire at the end of April. Midazolam has repeatedly failed to make prisoners unconscious in other executions, leading to painful deaths. Arkansas carried out Kenneth Williams' execution after the U.S. Supreme Court declined to intervene. Ahead of Thursday's execution, the daughter of one of Williams' victims, Kayla Greenwood, pleaded for the state to call off its plans, writing, quote, "His execution will not bring my father back or return to us what has been taken, but it will cause additional suffering," she said. The Trump administration, as we continue with our headlines now, the Trump administration sent mixed signals on North Korea Thursday as Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said the U.S. is open to direct negotiations with Kim Jong-un's regime over his country's nuclear program, while President Trump hinted at a possible nuclear war. Trump made the remark in an interview with the Reuters news service.
Well, there's a chance that we could end up having a major conflict with North Korea. Absolutely.
Trump's comment came as Secretary of State Tillerson told NPR he's open to direct talks with North Korea if the country is serious about permanently abandoning its nuclear program. Meanwhile, President Trump told Reuters South Korea should pay the $1 billion price tag for the THAAD missile defense system the U.S. recently began installing. Trump suggested the U.S. could cancel a free trade deal between South Korea and the United States if South Korea doesn't accept this demand. Back on Capitol Hill, House Republicans have called off their efforts to revive a bill that would repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. The White House had been pushing for a vote as early as today, as President Trump sought to win his first major legislative victory ahead of Saturday, which marks his 100th day in office. Trump's initial push for a health care bill failed after members of the far-right Freedom Caucus insisted the legislation did not go far enough toward rolling back President Obama's signature health care bill. The Pentagon's launched an investigation into former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn after he ignored a warning by the Defense Intelligence Agency not to collect payments by foreign governments. Despite the warning, Flynn accepted tens of thousands of dollars of fees from Russian sources, including RT, the Kremlin-funded television network. Flynn's firm also collected more than $500,000 for lobbying work that may have benefited the government of Turkey. On Capitol Hill, Congressmember Elijah Cummings of Maryland, the ranking Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, said Flynn appeared to break the law by accepting the payments.
We have no evidence, zilch, that he obtained permission from the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of State to accept any foreign government payments as required by law.
White House spokesperson Sean Spicer sought to deflect blame for the growing Michael Flynn scandal, noting the Obama administration granted Flynn security clearance in 2016. Congressman Cummings fired back, accusing Spicer and the White House of covering up for Flynn. President Donald Trump is set to sign an executive order today that would further expand offshore oil drilling in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Arctic Oceans. Trump will order a review of the government's 5-year oil and gas drilling plan, seeking to reverse protections set by former President Barack Obama. Trump's order comes as new data shows last month was the hottest March on record for a year without an El Nino episode. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says the average global temperature last month rose 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree Celsius above normal. The finding came as the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii said atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide reached a record 410 parts per million this month. Climate scientists say the maximum safe level is 350 parts per million. Meanwhile, in Washington, Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley introduced a bill Thursday that would transition the U.S. to 100% renewable energy by 2050.
Our responsibility is to stop burning fossil fuels and stop putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That's why we have to rapidly transition from an energy economy based on fossil fuels to one based on clean and renewable energy.
Senator Merkley's bill came as climate activists from around the country are converging on Washington, D.C. Saturday for the People's Climate March. Over the past 100 days, Trump has threatened to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord, begun dismantling President Obama's climate legacy, and revived the Keystone XL and Dakota Access pipelines. He's also put climate change deniers in charge of several key agencies, including the EPA, and proposed slashing the budget of the Environmental Protection Agency and other climate programs. Democracy Now! Will broadcast 5 hours of live coverage from the Climate March Saturday, beginning 10 a.m. Eastern Time. You can go to our website at democracynow.org to tune in. And after headlines, we'll speak with climate activist Bill McKibben. In Texas, state lawmakers have approved SB 4, a harsh anti-immigrant bill that'll outlaw sanctuary cities and allow police officers to check the immigration status of anyone they detain. The Texas House of Representatives approved the bill on a final vote of 94 to 53 Thursday afternoon after a marathon debate Wednesday evening that stretched past 3 a.m. Texas Democratic Representative Mary Gonzalez of El Paso broke down in tears as she recounted how she was a victim of sexual assault, pleading with her colleagues to reject an amendment that she said will prevent undocumented victims of similar crimes from contacting police or testifying in court.
The people who will feel the biggest effects of this are the most vulnerable, are the women and the children who are survivors of sexual assault, of rape, human traffickers, the people who will feel the disconnect from law enforcement, the people who are supposed to make them safe. If I have the bravery to stand up here and tell you things that I don't like to share in hopes that maybe it'll change your mind to not do the wrong thing, that I'm asking asking you to be as brave as me.
Despite her plea, the Republican-dominated House approved the amendment which will allow police to check the status of anyone detained, including those stopped for traffic violations or jaywalking. Democrats warn the measure will lead to racial profiling. Republicans also rejected an amendment that would have prohibited police from interrogating children about their immigration status. The debate drew hundreds of protesters who dressed in black and packed the Capitol Rotunda and House Gallery. The House version of SB 4 will have to be reconciled with a Senate version of the bill, which Texas Governor Greg Abbott has promised to sign. In Washington, D.C., Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly officially opened the Office of Voice. That's the Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement, which the Trump administration says is aimed at helping the victims of crimes committed by unlawful immigrants.
We are giving people who are victimized by illegal aliens for the first time a voice of their own. All crime is terrible, but these victims, as represented here, are unique, and they're all too often ignored.
Critics say the Voice program will demonize undocumented immigrants, comparing it to Germany's Nazi-era policy of publishing lists of crimes committed by Jews. Meanwhile, a hotline set up by Voice to report crimes committed by aliens has been flooded with calls from people reporting they've been victimized by extraterrestrials. One Twitter user urged her followers to dial the hotline at 1-855, and it went on from there, Voice, tweeting, quote, "I plan on calling every day to report how badly these green aliens from outer space are treating me. How about you?" In Syria, witnesses said warplanes bombed a pair of hospitals in the rebel-held province of Idlib Thursday, killing 10 people, including 2 newborn babies. The Union of Medical Care and Relief Organizations says 8 medical facilities in Idlib were deliberately attacked so far this month, leaving thousands without access to medical care. Local medics said either Russian or Syrian planes were to blame for the assaults. The attacks came as Israel launched a series of airstrikes around Damascus' main airport. The strikes appeared to target weapons cache bound for Hezbollah in neighboring Lebanon. In the Gaza Strip and occupied West Bank, Palestinians shut down businesses and halted services Thursday in a general strike held in solidarity with prisoners on hunger strike in Israeli jails. This is Hebron resident Shadia Sultan.
The solidarity is very nice and organized. Everything is closed. Everyone is in solidarity with the prisoners. Even the store owners have put up closed signs in their stores reading, "Today we are on a strike in solidarity with the prisoners," which gives a sense of pride and freedom to the prisoners.
More than 1,000 prisoners began refusing food on April 16th to protest poor conditions in Israeli jails, as well as Israel's policy of administrative detention, which allows Palestinians to be held for months without trial. In Senegal, a court has upheld a life sentence for the former U.S.-backed dictator of Chad, Hissène Habré, who was convicted last year of crimes against humanity. A 1992 Truth Commission in Chad determined Habré systematically tortured his opponents, killing up to 40,000 people during his 8 years in power in the 80s. Habré was tried in a special African Union-backed court established after a 2-decade-long campaign led by his victims. In Brazil, labor unions have called a nationwide general strike today to protest President Michel Temer's plans to dramatically roll back pensions and weaken labor laws. Organizers predict it'll be the largest work stoppage in Brazil's history. The strike comes just over a year after the impeachment of former President Dilma Rousseff, who called her ouster a coup amidst a huge corruption scandal involving much of Brazil's Congress and a third of President Temer's cabinet. Back in the United States, a union representing some 5,000 workers at Chicago area nursing homes have authorized a strike next week as long-running contract talks stalled over wages and staffing levels. The Service Employees International Union says the employers began negotiations asking nursing home workers to accept less than minimum wage. The strike would begin as a rolling series of work stoppages beginning May 4th. United Airlines has reached a settlement with Dr. David Dow, a passenger who was beaten and dragged from a United flight earlier this month after he refused an order to give up his paid seat. As part of the deal, Dr. Dow will not disclose the terms of the settlement or the amount paid out. Viral video of the incident shows a bloodied Dr. Dow being dragged semi-conscious down the aisle of a United jet by an airline security officer. Dr. Dow reportedly suffered a concussion, broken nose, lost teeth in the attack. After 17 years on the air, one of the longest-running community news programs, Free Speech Radio News, will go dark after its last weekly broadcast today. The worker-run News Collective produced a daily news hour for Pacifica Radio Network until 2014, when it switched to weekly. FSRN helped pioneer a decentralized grassroots model for independent national journalism with reporters covering issues in their communities, but says it has struggled to find firm financial footing. And in New York City, hundreds of people rallied Thursday at City Hall, then marched to the Metropolitan Correctional Center federal prison on the first anniversary of the arrest of the Bronx 120 young men who were arrested en masse in what's been described as the largest police raid in New York City history. The city says the militarized raid on the Eastchester Gardens public housing project targeted gang members, but family members and residents say the raid racially targeted young black men, many of whom they say were not part of gangs. The organizers of Thursday's rally say more than 1,000 New Yorkers have been arrested in a series of mass police raids over the last year alone. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Just hours before a deadline, Congress has averted a government shutdown by working on a short-term spending bill and a broader deal to fund agencies through September. Without the extension, federal agencies would run out of money by midnight tonight. One of the key disputes stem from Trump's demands that the government funding bill allocate $1.4 billion for that border wall construction along the Mexico border. In the midst of the negotiations, Trump lashed out at congressional Democrats Thursday with a series of tweets writing, quote, "I promise to rebuild our military and secure our border. Democrats want to shut down the government. Politics," he tweeted. White House spokesperson Sean Spicer addressed the budget fight during his daily press briefing.
There needs to be a continuing resolution effective this Friday. The president has done everything possible, worked extremely hard with Congress to ensure that we maintain the government open, keep the government open. The Democrats at the last minute have come in and thrown a lot of monkey wrenches into the ability for this to get done, despite the president doing everything that he can to show good faith to keep this going.
Speaking earlier this week, New York Senator Chuck Schumer expressed hope that a deal would be reached.
The Democratic and Republican leaders of both the House and Senate were making good progress, and I'm very hopeful we can get a budget done by Friday. We've asked the president not to interfere. If he doesn't interfere, we can get this done. If he demands things, poison pills like the wall, which not only Democrats but Republicans oppose, every single Republican on the border, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico oppose it, we can get this done. So we'd ask him to let us do our work, not throw in some last-minute poison pills that could undo it, and we can get this done.
This comes as House Republicans have called off their efforts to revive a bill to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. The White House had been pushing for a vote as early as today, as President Trump sought to win his first major legislative victory ahead of Saturday, which marks his 100th day in office. In just a moment, we're going to Capitol Hill, where we'll be joined from the Russell Rotunda by Vermont Congressmember Peter Welch, the chief deputy whip of the House Democratic Caucus. We'll go to break and then come back with the Vermont Congressmember. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org. Stay with us.
esperando a que hoy sea diferente y poder sonreír. Barreras extremistas son las que me quieren acabar. Yo solo quiero que mi voz ante el mundo se pueda escuchar.
This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from Vermont PBS as we continue our many-city tour around the country. We'll be in Washington covering the People's Climate March tomorrow from 10 in the morning Eastern to 3 p.m. in the afternoon. But we're right now joined in the Russell Rotunda by Vermont Congressmember Peter Welch, Chief Deputy Whip of the House Democratic Caucus. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Congressman Welch. It's great to have you with us. Can you start off by assessing President Trump's first 100 days and where you are in Congress right now on this eve of the 100th day?
Well, it's pretty much of a mess. I mean, the border wall that he promised has not gone up, thank goodness. The ban on Muslims coming into the country has been declared unconstitutional, so we've got a check and balance operating with the judiciary so far. We're now having the health care debate was a complete failure. So a lot of the big-time promises that the president made, he's failed to deliver on. In the first 100 days, by the way, they really are important because there's three things the president can do in that 100 days. Number one, make good on promises that he made during the campaign, and what you've seen is an inability on the part of the president to do that. And number two, it's an opportunity to create unity in the country. The president is given a honeymoon, any president, Republican or Democrat, and that requires them to reach out where there is some common ground. And there were two opportunities for President Bush that he squandered, or President Trump that he squandered. One was the infrastructure, where a lot of us are ready to work with him, but they haven't presented a plan. And two is on lowering the cost of prescription drugs, where the president in the campaign and in office has said he's for that. Democrats are all in on that, but there's no plan. And then the third thing is that the president can identify what he or she is going to focus on in the next 4 years and identify the big challenge in the country. And the big challenge in this country is income inequality, and everything that the president has proposed would intensify that, accelerate it, not diminish it. So I think it's been a pretty poor showing for the first 100 days.
So we all know that he did not succeed in repealing Obamacare the first time. And then there was this 11th hour effort to do it again. What happened?
Well, it was never in the cards because the plan is not even written. You know, what happened on health care is that the Republicans own this thing. They had kind of a lounge act, one of my Republican friends called it, where they attacked Obamacare for 7 years. They said they had a replacement. The day to present the replacement arrived, and it wasn't written. So they really didn't have a plan, and what they substituted as a health care plan was something that was going to, in effect, be a tax cut. That's really what it was. 24 million people lost their health care over 10 years, and we were going to have a $1 trillion shift out of health care as a tax cut that went essentially to people making over $250,000, but largely over $1 million. And Amy, the 400 wealthiest families in the country under that, quote, health care bill, were going to get a check for $7 million. So this was not a health care plan. It was never written. And you had controversy on the Republican side between the Freedom Caucus, who wanted basically no coverage whatsoever, and the moderates, who were really concerned that some people in their district were going to lose their coverage. So it collapsed, and I think they're still struggling with that conflict.
And what happened with the spending bill? It has not yet been signed as we go to broadcast. It hasn't been voted on.
Well, what's happened is that there's been an effort on the part of the president to inject other things in there, like defunding Planned Parenthood or money for the wall, which are non-starters on the Democratic side. And they can't get this, they can't keep the lights on in government without some Democratic votes. But the Democrats, rightly, and I strongly support this, are unwilling to essentially have the keeping the lights on in government held hostage to get the wall that the president wants, wall funding or defunding Planned Parenthood. So at the end of the day, I think they're going to put down their demands and we'll keep the lights on in government. But Amy, let me give a little context. It's now April, the end of April. The budget that we're talking about was supposed to begin last October. And we don't have a budget. We have a continuing resolution where basically we're just operating under last year's numbers. And the fundamental responsibility of a legislative body is to pass a budget. And we haven't done that, I think, during the entire time that Paul Ryan has been the Speaker of the House. So it's not going well, and that's actually really bad for the country.
So in an interview with Reuters, President Donald Trump has warned there's a chance we could end up having a major conflict with North Korea. Absolutely, unquote. And then you have the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, saying that he might engage in direct talks with North Korea. Can you talk about what's happening right now?
Well, what we see with President Trump is that he just flies off whatever is in his head comes out of his mouth or comes out in the form of a tweet. I mean, when he's seriously talking about military action in North Korea, it's pretty reckless. Think about it. North Korea has artillery pieces. They have like 30,000 artillery pieces that are within 30 miles of Seoul. Seoul has millions of people living there, including almost 300,000 Americans. So any military action on our part is going to have massive retaliation. So the military option is not realistic without this having us drawn into a conflagration and millions of people, or hundreds of thousands of people possibly losing their lives. So that's a really bad situation, and I think the president should be just talking diplomacy and not making a reckless threat of military action where it's going to be very damaging. A lot of people would lose their lives.
Can you go back to what President Trump did propose yesterday, which was this week, the tax plan, and how you would assess this plan? Who benefits, who loses?
Well, bottom line, what he does is propose about $5 trillion addition to the deficit. And it would significantly lower taxes. And if you're in the top 1% of this country, it's a pretty good plan for you. If you're anyone else, it's pretty bad. But just some of the elements of it, he talks, first of all, it's only on one page. So there's no detail. So there's no detail on this whatsoever, except in broad strokes, it would add $5 to $7 trillion to the deficit. It would allow a lot of individuals to essentially get that hedge fund exemption, where instead of paying taxes at 35 or 36%, they come down to 15%. It would eliminate the estate tax that would really benefit about 5,000 to 6,000 families in the U.S., because most families don't have to pay the estate tax. And there's, I think, a number of reasons to be strongly against this. First, it would hurt economic growth. We saw what happened in the Bush tax cuts. This promise that it produces growth doesn't work. Second, it accelerates income inequality, and that is the major issue of our time. It just shifts an enormous amount of benefits to very wealthy people at the expense of the middle class and low-income people, and at the expense of investing in our economy. And third, the deficit is something that we really, progressives should talk about. Because what happens here is if they do a tax cut that shifts all this money to the high-income folks and to corporations, the next year, when the deficit goes up as a result of that tax cut, there's enormous pressure to cut the budget and then blame the deficit on, quote, too much spending, as opposed to tax cuts we never paid for. So this is a very ominous direction that the president's taking, because it is a heel on the neck of the middle class. It guarantees that we won't have the investment in infrastructure, sustainable health care, making college affordable, NIH, and searching for cures for diseases. So this is a very reckless, in my view, very reckless plan. The good news is I think it won't pass.
The capital gains tax cuts, talking about reducing from 35% to 15% at a, what is it, something like adding $3 trillion to the deficit. How does this square with deficit hawks in Congress?
Well, what we've noticed, unfortunately, is that the deficit hawks suspend their convictions in favor of a tax cut. And I was reading comments from one of my Republican colleagues who says he's a deficit hawk and says, We have to endure the pain of a deficit. Well, the we turns out to be the American people. The benefit of the tax cut goes to the very wealthy. So there is obviously hypocrisy here. It doesn't work. And I think the interesting thing for me is that I think progressives have to be concerned about this deficit because it serves to become a tool, an argument after the deficit goes up as a result of these unpaid-for tax cuts. There's enormous pressure to bring down spending on all of those things that middle-class America needs, including infrastructure and job-creating opportunities. By the way, there's another...
I wanted to ask you about...
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, you know, Donald Trump... I'll stop. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, what I'm noticing in this first 100 days is something that is actually kind of puzzling. Donald Trump won in rural America. That's who elected him. And every one of his policies, trying to repeal health care, this tax system that is an enormous shift of wealth to really the coastal elites, all of these things are really punishing to rural America. And he's going literally for policies that hurt the people who elected him and put their confidence in him. So that's a political puzzle to me because it doesn't make sense to give the back of your hand to the people who got you across the finish line.
How do his plans increase inequality in this country?
Well, if you have a health care plan where 24 million people, pardon me, who have health care today lose it, that's pretty bad. If you have a health care plan where a lot of these community hospitals in Vermont and all around the country have gone from red ink to black ink because all the free care they had been giving are now covered by Medicaid, that really hurts rural America where so many of those hospitals are placed. The tax plan is one where the benefits go to the elites in urban areas and to corporations, and it just sucks more money out of rural America. So those are very direct and rugged policies that are going to be crushing to the economic prospects of folks, especially in rural America. It's an all-out assault. You know, so net neutrality, I'm in the Energy and Commerce Committee, we're talking about that. More than any other section of the country, we need broadband build-out in rural America. We're losing population there. The economy is struggling. And if we're going to create jobs, we have to have a robust internet. And we have to have access to that internet, whether you're a small entrepreneur in a garage in Brattleboro, Vermont, or in Peoria, Illinois, no different than if you're in New York City or San Francisco or LA. So I'm surprised that he's allowing his FCC commissioner now to propose essentially getting rid of net neutrality. And we're going to end up, if they're successful, with fast lanes and slow lanes and prioritization, and that hurts rural America.
So how can Congress weigh in? You're talking about Ajit Pai unveiling a plan at a forum hosted by FreedomWorks, a right-wing group, where he laid out his plan to really dismantle net neutrality, a plan that's backed by the Koch brothers, and a rule classifying the Internet as a public utility, leaving the industry to largely police itself. Evan Greer of the digital rights group Fight for the Future said, quote, "Internet users will fight tooth and nail to defend our basic right to connect, create, learn, and share." How can Congress weigh in here?
Well, first, we are weighing in. You know, I serve on the Telecom Committee. Mike Doyle is our chairman on that committee, and we're mobilizing our colleagues to fight and make the arguments, have hearings. So we're going to be doing all that we can. But there's another reality here. The Republicans enjoy a majority in the House and in the Senate. So we don't have the numbers to push them back, and it's why Evan Greer, what he says, the mobilization of people is absolutely so important. If it's just the Democrats in Congress that are fighting for net neutrality, without the demonstration of widespread grassroots support, we're not going to succeed. And if you remember, when then Chairman Wheeler was considering this whole issue, there was an enormous outpouring from the public about protecting net neutrality, and I think it had an influence. I thought Chairman Wheeler came down with a good decision, and he was an excellent FCC commissioner. But We've got a new team in town. But that public mobilization, I think, is absolutely crucial. It's not just Congress, and we don't have the numbers here, so we need help from folks outside.
We're talking to Congressman Peter Welch in the Russell Rotunda in Washington, D.C. He's the sole Vermont Congress member, and we're here in Burlington at Vermont PBS. Congressman Welch, I want to ask you about comments by your colleague, Maryland Congressman Elijah Cummings, the top Democrat on the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Cummings spoke Thursday about the investigation into President Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn.
I'm releasing a letter that was sent directly to General Flynn on October 8, 2014, from the Office of General Counsel at the Defense Intelligence Agency, his former agency. This letter explicitly warned General Flynn, as he entered retirement, that the Constitution prohibited him from accepting any foreign government payments without advance permission. The Pentagon's warning to General Flynn was bold, italicized, and could not have been clearer. We have no evidence, zilch, that he obtained permission from the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of State to accept any foreign government payments as required by law.
So that's Maryland Congressmember Elijah Cummings. Vermont Congressman Peter Welch, just to correct what I said before, you are the only congressman from Vermont. Of course, there are two senators. But you joined with your Democratic colleagues in the House Oversight Committee in demanding White House documents on Michael Flynn. What are you looking for here? You also have the Trump administration blaming President Obama for giving Michael Flynn security clearance.
Well, first, with respect to General Flynn, we're looking for evidence of the payments that he received from foreign governments that would be in violation of the law. There's an immense amount of evidence. He's acknowledged some of this, that he was on the payroll. He was getting compensation from foreign governments in that during a time that he had a security clearance, and there's serious questions about him being an absolute violation of the law. So that's the issue with respect to General Flynn. But the second issue, the one that's really ongoing, is the Russian connection and what was it, if anything, in the campaign. You know, there's no question, all the intelligence agencies have acknowledged the Russians deliberately hacked into the Democratic National Committee, deliberately disseminated information in an effort to tip the balance in that campaign. The question is whether Trump campaign associates were participating and engaged in ongoing discussions with any of the Russian operatives. We don't have the answer to that question, but we deserve the answer to that question, and that's the point of these investigations that are occurring in the intelligence committees in the House and Senate.
Congressmember Peter Welch, we're going to leave it there, but I want to ask you one question that's going on not only in Vermont but around the country, and that is the issue of sanctuary cities. Here in Vermont, we're in Burlington, Burlington becoming a sanctuary city, Montpelier, the capital. Talk about what this means and the resistance at the state and local levels to the Trump administration's immigration policies and cooperating with ICE arrests.
Well, I think it's two things. First of all, I think there's enormous citizen reaction and rejection of the president's fierce hostility towards immigration and towards undocumented workers and good citizens and good people in this country. So him building the wall, vilifying Hispanics, you're just seeing people across this country say, wait a minute, that's not the America I know. Secondly, this is a local control issue in many respects. Is the local police department in your city and mine essentially just an arm of ICE, or is it got primary responsibility to protect and enforce the laws in that community and make that community a safer place? So some of this is pushback by local communities who don't think that their police forces should be pushed around by the political agenda of President Trump. And you're seeing a combination of political leaders saying, hey, we want to have our police forces protecting our people and enforcing our laws. And you're seeing citizens rejecting the dragnet approach that President Trump is taking towards immigration. You know, there is a lot of discretion that law enforcement agencies have, and it's appropriate in law enforcement to have discretion. You know, if you're going 3 miles over the speed limit, most police officers won't give you a ticket, even though, quote, legally they could. And that discretion with President Obama was restrained. With President Bush, it's really aggressive. So that's, I think, what you're seeing with the sanctuary city movement.
Congressman Peter Welch, thanks so much for being with us. The sole U.S. congressman from Vermont, chief deputy whip of the House Democratic Caucus on the eve of the 100th day of the Trump administration. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we'll turn to his fellow Vermonter, who also is in Washington. That is Bill McKibben, co-founder of 350.org, who's there along with thousands of other people as they stream into Washington for the People's Climate March on Saturday. Democracy Now! Will be covering it live. Stay with us.
When the world was young, the rain was never ending, the mud caked our boots, and the river rose so high. When the world was young, we never stopped to look around us or savored the beauty. It was just scenery rolling by. Out the window of another 3 hours on I-5, hypnotized by windshield wipers, logging trucks and gray skies. There's a sadness in the hills here, denuded, bare and broken. These streets sung songs unheard and whisper words unspoken. When the world was young, if you saw it, you
When the world was young, Casey Neal and the Norway Rats here on Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. To mark the 100th day of Donald Trump's presidency, thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of climate activists from around the country are converging on Washington, D.C. Saturday for the People's Climate March. Over the past 100 days, Trump has threatened to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord, begun dismantling President Obama's climate legacy, and revived the Keystone XL and Dakota Access pipelines. Trump has also put climate change deniers in charge of several key agencies, including the Environmental Protection Agency, and proposed slashing the budget of the EPA and other climate programs. This comes as scientists have confirmed 2016 was the warmest year on record, and that the amount of carbon in the Earth's atmosphere is now at a new high, recently topping 410 parts per million for the first time in human history. Ahead of Saturday's march, organizers of the People's Climate March recently released this short video.
From Boston down to Florida, all the way from the Arctic, all the way from the Gulf, frontline communities standing side by side, refusing to give in.
Climate change has happened. Climate catastrophe is a reality. We are dying.
I'm not a big believer in man-made climate
Trump
change.
has now signed orders saying construction can resume.
Almost a 30% decrease in the EPA. Trump administration orders a media blackout.
We tell them no more.
We hear the ancestors telling us it's time for us to do something greater than anything our brain ever thought was possible.
That this is the greatest uniting of nations, of movements, and of peoples that we've seen in this country in a very long time.
We will stand with those who are at the front.
Our oceans are not for sale to the highest oil and gas bidders.
Keep it in the ground. Keep it in the ground. It's about public health. It's about jobs. It's about justice.
Well, activities are already underway in Washington, D.C. ahead of Saturday's People's Climate March. Thursday night, Indigenous activists took over the intersection outside Trump International Hotel, shut it down by performing a round dance. This is Indigenous Environmental Network organizer Joy Brown.
What do you do when your earth is under attack? Stand up, fight back. What do you do when your mother is under attack? Stand up, fight back. What do you do when the water is under attack? Stand up, fight doesn't matter what Trump does. Because in the end, we are going to still be standing. In the end, no matter what he tries to put through up there on the Hill, we are going to overturn it. You have to have faith.
Democracy Now! Will broadcast 5 hours of live coverage from the Climate March Saturday, beginning 10 Eastern Time. You can go to our website, democracynow.org, to tune in. But for more, we're going to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Bill McKibben, co-founder of 350.org, usually here up in Vermont at Middlebury College, where we were yesterday, but now in Washington for the Climate March. Bill, can you talk about what are the plans?
Sure. You know, normally, Amy, I'd rather be there in Vermont with you, but I got to say, Washington's pretty exciting right now. That round dance last night was amazing, and at the same time, or just before, there was a big party at the Hip Hop Caucus headquarters where Dr. Beverly Wright, the environmental justice pioneer, was honored, and so was the great singer Antonique Smith. This town is starting to buzz. Saturday's going to be intense, in part because they're forecasting the hottest April 29th on record for Washington, D.C. It'll be beautiful weather, but please bring a water bottle and some sunscreen and wear a hat. It can say something clever on it, but make sure it's on top of your head. It's going to be a remarkable day as people march and as people surround the White House and then sit down for a while. I guess people are saying it's going to be one of the biggest sit-downs, if not sit-ins, in the history of the nation's capital. The message is we're noticing. We're well aware of what Trump has done in his first 100 days, and people are organized all over the place to fight back.
And talk about who's organizing this mass assembly and why you're doing it now.
Well, not me in the first place. There's hundreds of groups involved in this organizing, and they run the whole spectrum. In the lead, as usual, will be environmental justice groups, indigenous groups, the people who've really been leading this fight from the start. A really big addition this time around is large participation by the labor movement. You know, people have tried to make out that there's a split between environmentalism and labor over the years. And if that was ever true, it becomes less so all the time. Groups like SEIU and the nurses and the transportation workers and everybody just flooding in for this fight. It's going to be, well, it's going to be not carried out in the hope that we can convince Donald Trump to do something different. We can't, and the GOP in Congress, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the fossil fuel industry, isn't going to do anything either. We're well aware of that. What we're doing is laying down the most serious of markers about the future. And one of the numbers that will be on everybody's lips is 100, as in 100% renewable energy. Yesterday, I stood with Jeff Merkley, the senator from Oregon, and Bernie Sanders, who I think may come from the very state that you're in today. And they put forward really a landmark piece of legislation. For the first time, they said we need 100% renewable energy, not we need some solar panels and we need some fracking wells, not the all of the above energy policy that the Obama administration favored. Instead, finally saying, we're ready to go 100%. The technology is clearly there. The price of a solar panel keeps plummeting, which is why it's so absurd to watch Donald Trump try to somehow revive the expensive and dirty coal industry. We're ready to go, and now we've got, I think, what's going to be the flag around which progressives rally. Nothing less than 100% will do.
A new Washington Post article is headlined, "The company behind the Dakota Access Pipeline is in another controversy." It details how Energy Transfer Partners, the company behind the controversial Dakota Access Pipeline, has now twice spilled drilling fluids in Ohio wetlands this month while constructing the $4.2 billion gas pipeline, the Rover Pipeline, which is slated to stretch from Appalachia to Ontario, Canada. One of the spills included 2 million gallons of drilling fluid. Bill McKibben, your response.
I guess I can't say that it comes as an enormous surprise, Amy. Look, there have been, any pipeline company you look at, TransCanada, Energy Transfer Partners, they all have a long list of these kind of spills. Some of them a few thousand gallons, some of them a few 100,000 gallons. That's precisely why people at Standing Rock were so right to say, do not put this across our water supply. We know what'll happen. We don't know the day that it will happen, but we know that it will happen. And that's why people are standing up again to fight the Keystone Pipeline in Nebraska, in South Dakota, and Montana. Everyone's well aware of what this industry is about. It engages not only in those kind of practices, polluting people's water, but it's polluted our political life now for a quarter century. One of the really powerful things that's going on in this country right now is watching attorney generals like Eric Schneiderman in New York and Maura Healey in Massachusetts take on the oil companies that systematically have lied. The Exxon is the main mainly in the crosshairs right now, that have systematically lied for a quarter century, and those cases are advancing. A New York judge has taken the Exxon case under her wing now, and I think we're going to see remarkable disclosures about all the things that they knew all along.
The significance of 410 parts per million. I mean, your group is called 350.org, based on 350 parts per million.
So anything greater than 350 parts per million is more than the planet can safely deal with. It's what's overwhelming our climate system, because as you say, we were going up about 3 parts per million per year, and 2 days ago, for the first time in, we think, at least 5 million years, the planet broached the 410 parts per million level. Now, you know, it'll go down for a while and then back up, and you know, eventually we'll always be above 410, and then above 420, and above 430. We just keep pouring more carbon into the atmosphere, and the toll it's taking is now not some future or abstract threat. It's what happens every day. You know, the latest numbers we have for March are for March. They show that March was the 4th warmest month that we have records on, dating back to the 1880s, and the warmest month in a non-El Nino period. That is to say, we're kind of in a permanent El Nino now. The temperature is always elevated. March saw record lows for the date in global sea ice. That's really, really scary. We're melting some of the biggest physical features on our Earth. But it's not just remote places. I mean, Pakistan, which is always a pretty hot place, crushed all its heat records a couple of weeks ago. It was 122 degrees in April. Up in Siberia, this year's massive wildfires began in April. These are not good signs, not at all, not for billions of people on this Earth who are living close to the edge. I think the place maybe to watch with the greatest worry right at the moment and to try to help the most may be those parts of Africa around Somalia that are enduring a climate-caused and really record-breaking drought. The Times said not long ago that it may be the greatest humanitarian crisis since the end of World War II. And of course, where humanitarian crises happen, so do political instability. This is the world that we're building, and building fast. And it's the world that people are trying somehow to slow down. That's what this march on Saturday is about. That's what this bill introduced yesterday by Merkley and Sanders are about. We're looking for the cracks in the Death Star, trying very hard to bring down this fossil fuel machine before it does any more damage.
Bill McKibben, President Donald Trump is set to sign an executive order today that would further expand offshore oil drilling in the Pacific, the Atlantic, and Arctic oceans. And President Trump also ordered this week a review of national monuments, potentially opening up millions of acres of public lands to drilling, mining, and logging. Trump said Wednesday his executive order was aimed at reversing Obama's use of the 1906 Antiquities Act to protect federal land from development. the significance of these executive orders. Will he be able to move forward and do this?
He'll be able to do some of it. I mean, here they spent part of the week talking about how they're going to be trying to do more drilling for oil and gas in national parks. I mean, who wants to go look at Old Faithful when you can see a derrick pumping up and down someplace? Look, they're doing everything they can on the Koch brothers fossil fuel industry wish list. These guys have waited a long time for absolute power. They've got it. They're making the most of it. The only piece of good news is it's incredibly unpopular. Of all the unpopular things that Trump is doing, the polling shows that the one that's most out of whack with Americans' opinions are these attacks on the environment. And it means, too, that people are going to have to start stepping up a little bit in other places. I noted this week that after an amazing 6-year campaign by students and faculty and alumni, Harvard University, the richest and most famous educational institution on the planet, more or less announced that it was divesting from fossil fuel. Now, it didn't use those words because it would be too embarrassing, I guess, for it to back down on its strident position against divestment. But its investment managers said, we've put a pause on fossil fuel investments and we don't think we'll ever resume. I think one of the things that's happening is that people are realizing that they can't pass the buck to the government because the government, at least as far as it comes to environmental protection, doesn't exist, that they're going to have to bite the bullet a little bit themselves. And look, there are no silver linings to Trumpism. This is an unmitigated disaster, but let's hope that at least it helps people find their courage in this resistance. Saturday will be another episode in this ongoing saga of citizens stepping up. Citizenship's been out of fashion for some decades in our country, but now it's back in fashion. Weekends are for fighting tyranny. And that's why it's going to be really fun to see Democracy Now! And everybody else out on the Mall on Saturday.
Why does marching matter in this last 30 seconds? And are these marches happening around the country?
Marches all over the country, and they matter. I mean, it's a beautiful week of action. It began with the scientists marching last week and marching about facts. And now it's all the rest of us who aren't scientists, but who can take those facts and use them to turn into action. That's what we're marching for. The action's not going to come in the short run from D.C., but we need to come together once in a while from all our work out in the world, fighting every pipeline and coal mine, backing every solar panel and windmill. We need to come together sometimes and show our strength so that the Trump administration at its 100th day is under no illusions that people are somehow in a fog. We know absolutely what this guy is doing, and boy, are we pissed off about it.
Bill McKibben, I want to thank you for being with us, co-founder of 350.org, and that does it for our broadcast. We'll be out on Saturday broadcasting 5 hours from the People's Climate March starting at 10 Eastern Standard Time. On Saturday night, I'll be speaking at Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ, and on Sunday at Busboys and Poets. Then it's on to Durham, North Carolina. On Monday night, I'll be speaking at the Eno River Unitarian Church at 7. On Tuesday, 6:30, I'll be speaking at Coral Gables Congregational Church in Miami. On Wednesday at 7:30 in United Methodist Church in Tampa and beyond. Check our website, democracynow.org. Thanks so much.